The snowstorm hit the New Mexico territory with a fury that hadn't been seen in 20 years. And Zelda Carrington knew she was going to die before she saw another sunrise. The wagon she'd been traveling in had broken an axle 3 miles back. The driver had taken the only horse and abandoned her without a backward glance. And now, the wind cut through her thin traveling dress like 1,000 frozen knives. She stumbled through the white darkness, her fingers and toes already numb, her lips blue, praying for any sign of shelter as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. The ranch house appeared like a mirage through the swirling snow, solid and real with smoke rising from its chimney. Zelda fell against the wooden door, her fists barely able to pound against the solid oak. Her voice came out as a whisper, then a sob, then finally a desperate cry that tore from her frozen lungs. "Please have mercy. Please, I'm freezing to death out here." The door swung open so suddenly, she nearly collapsed into the arms of the man standing there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples, and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. Those eyes widened at the sight of her, taking in her blue lips and the ice crystals clinging to her eyelashes. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed, and then his strong arms were around her, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. "I've got you. You're safe now." Zelda tried to speak, to thank him, but her teeth were chattering so violently she couldn't form words. The warmth of the house hit her like a physical blow after the brutal cold outside, and she gasped as he carried her toward a large stone fireplace where flames crackled and danced. "Don't try to talk yet," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow calmed her racing heart even as her body shook uncontrollably. He set her down on a thick rug in front of the fire and immediately began working at the buttons of her ice-covered coat. "We need to get these wet clothes off you before the cold does permanent damage." Through her haze of cold and fear, Zelda felt a flutter of modesty, but the man's face was all business, his movements efficient and careful. He wrapped her in thick wool blankets, then disappeared and returned moments later with a cup of something that steamed in the firelight. "Warm broth," he explained, helping her hold the cup because her hands were shaking too badly to manage alone. "Small sips. Your body needs to warm up slowly." The liquid burned going down, but in the most wonderful way, spreading heat through her chest and stomach. Zelda took another sip, then another, and gradually the violent shaking began to subside into mere trembling. She looked up at her rescuer, really seeing him for the first time. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with strong features that spoke of time spent outdoors and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though right now his expression was serious with concern. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did," he said soberly. "Another hour in that storm and you wouldn't have made it. I'm Randall Iverson. This is my ranch about 8 miles south of Santa Rosa." "Zelda Carrington," she replied, taking another sip of broth. "I was traveling through to California when our wagon broke down. The driver took the horse and left me." Randall's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "What kind of man leaves a woman alone in a blizzard? If I ever meet the coward, I'll make him answer for it." Despite everything, Zelda felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire or the broth. It had been a long time since anyone had shown such genuine concern for her welfare. "I'm just grateful you were here, that your house was here." "The ranch has been in my family for 15 years now," Randall said, settling onto the floor beside her, though keeping a respectful distance. "We run cattle and horses. Usually I've got a few ranch hands staying in the bunkhouse, but I sent them into town 3 days ago when I saw this storm coming. Wanted them somewhere safe rather than isolated out here." "But you stayed," Zelda observed, her voice getting stronger as warmth continued to seep back into her bones. He shrugged, a small smile finally touching his lips. Someone needs to tend the animals, keep the fires burning. Besides, I've weathered worse storms than this, though I admit I didn't expect to find a half-frozen woman on my doorstep. I'm sorry to intrude, Zelda began, but Randall shook his head firmly. Don't apologize for surviving. You did exactly what you needed to do. He studied her face carefully, his gaze professional but kind. How are your fingers and toes feeling? Any numbness or pain? Now that he mentioned it, Zelda became aware of a fierce, tingling sensation in her extremities, like thousands of pins and needles. She winced, and Randall nodded as if he'd expected that response. That's actually good. Means the blood is flowing back properly. It'll hurt for a while, but you'll be fine. He stood, his movements fluid and confident. I'm going to get you some dry clothes. They'll be too big, but they'll be warm, and that's what matters. While he was gone, Zelda looked around the ranch house. It was a single large room with a bedroom area partitioned off by a curtain in one corner, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and the main living space where she sat. Everything was clean and well maintained, but there was a masculine simplicity to it. No photographs on the walls, no feminine touches. She wondered about Randall's story, about why a man like him lived alone on this remote ranch. He returned with a flannel shirt, thick wool pants, and several pairs of socks. There's a changing screen in the bedroom corner, he said, pointing. Take your time. Call if you need help. Zelda stood on shaky legs, clutching the blankets around herself as she made her way to the designated area. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, still clumsy from the cold, but she managed to change into the borrowed clothes. Randall had been right about the size. The shirt hung nearly to her knees and she had to roll the pant legs several times, but they were warm and soft from wear, and they smelled like cedar and wood smoke. Somehow, wearing his clothes felt intimate in a way that made her heart beat faster. When she emerged, Randall had hung her wet dress near the fire to dry and was stirring something in a pot on the stove. The smell made her stomach growl loudly, and he laughed, the sound rich and warm. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. "Yesterday morning," Zelda admitted. The driver wasn't inclined to share his supplies. Randall's expression darkened again, but he simply ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. "Well, we'll fix that right now. Come sit." The stew was thick with beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions, seasoned perfectly and hearty enough to chase away the last lingering chill from her bones. Zelda ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, and Randall watched her with satisfaction. "My mother's recipe," he said when she complimented the food. "She insisted I learn to cook before I struck out on my own, said she wasn't going to raise a son who couldn't take care of himself." "She sounds like a wise woman," Zelda said. She was. The past tense wasn't lost on Zelda. "She and my father died in a cholera outbreak 7 years ago. They'd moved back east to be near my sister when she had her first baby. I stayed here to run the ranch." "I'm so sorry," Zelda said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." Randall nodded, his expression distant for a moment. "It was, but life on a ranch doesn't stop for grief. The animals still need tending, the work still needs doing. Keeping busy helped." He focused on her again, those whiskey-colored eyes curious but not prying. "What about you? What brings you all the way out here, heading for California?" Zelda set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly dimmed. She'd known the question would come eventually, but that didn't make it easier to answer. "I'm a widow," she said quietly. "My husband died 8 months ago, yellow fever. We'd been married for only 2 years." "I'm sorry," Randall said, and the genuine compassion in his voice made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "We had a small farm in Missouri," she continued, needing to tell the story now that she'd started. "After Daniel died, I tried to keep it running, but I couldn't manage alone. The bank foreclosed. My brother-in-law offered me a position in his household in Sacramento, helping his wife with their children. It seemed like my only option. That driver was supposed to get you to California." Randall's tone suggested what he thought of that plan. "He came highly recommended," Zelda said dryly. "Though clearly that was a mistake. When the wagon broke down, he said it was foolish to stay with it in a storm, that he was going for help. Told me to wait, but I could see it in his eyes." "He wasn't coming back. So you walked," Randall said, "in a blizzard with no idea where you were going or if you'd find shelter. What choice did I have? Staying with the wagon meant freezing to death for certain. Walking at least gave me a chance." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not the kind of woman who sits around waiting to be saved. I do what needs doing." Something shifted in Randall's expression, a spark of respect and something else, something warmer. "I can see that," he said softly. "You're a survivor, Zelda Carrington." The way he said her name sent a pleasant shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She looked away, suddenly flustered. "I should help with the dishes," she said, starting to rise. "You should rest," Randall countered. "You've been through an ordeal, the dishes can wait." "I'm not an invalid," Zelda protested. "And I won't be a burden. If I'm staying under your roof, I should contribute." "You're not a burden, you're a guest, but I can see you're stubborn, so we'll compromise. You dry, I'll wash." They worked side by side at the kitchen counter, their movements gradually finding a rhythm. Randall told her about the ranch, about the 100 head of cattle he ran and the horses he bred and trained. Zelda found herself relaxing as she listened to his deep voice, asking questions about ranch life, genuinely interested in this world so different from anything she'd known. "It's hard work," Randall admitted, "especially alone. But there's something satisfying about building something with your own hands, about working with the land and the animals. Some days are brutal, but some days, when I'm out riding the range at sunset and everything is quiet and beautiful, I can't imagine doing anything else." "It sounds wonderful," Zelda said wistfully. "I loved our farm, loved watching things grow, tending the chickens and the garden. Daniel handled the crops and the heavy work, but I had my own responsibilities. I felt useful, needed. These past months I felt so adrift." "Going to your brother-in-law's house, helping with his children, that didn't appeal to you?" Randall asked perceptively. Zelda hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. "Not particularly. But what else could I do? A widow with no property, no money, no family of my own. I have skills, I can cook and clean and so, but jobs for women are scarce, especially out here. Benjamin's offer was practical, even if it felt like charity." "Maybe this storm happened for a reason," Randall said quietly. "Maybe you weren't meant to make it to California." Their eyes met, and Zelda's breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility, until a loud gust of wind rattled the windows and broke the spell. Randall cleared his throat. "Speaking of the storm, it doesn't look like it's letting up any time soon. You'll have to stay here until it passes. Could be a few days, judging by the look of it." "I don't want to impose," Zelda began, but Randall cut her off with a gentle smile. "It's not an imposition. Truth is, it'll be nice to have company. Gets lonely out here sometimes, just me and the animals." He gestured toward the bedroom area. "You'll take the bed, I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Zelda protested. "You can and you will," Randall said firmly. "I won't have a lady sleeping on the floor while I take the bed. My mother would rise from her grave to box my ears if I even suggested it." Despite herself, Zelda laughed. Well, when you put it that way. As the evening wore on, they sat by the fire and talked. Randall shared stories about life on the ranch, about ornery bulls and clever horses, about drives to market and the harsh realities of frontier life. Zelda told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her brief, happy marriage, about the dreams she'd had for the future before yellow fever had stolen them away. "You ever think about remarrying?" Randall asked, his tone carefully casual. Zelda considered the question seriously. "I did love Daniel," she said slowly. "And when he died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd never want to open my heart like that again. But lately, I've realized that I'm only 23 years old. I have a whole life ahead of me. It seems wasteful to spend it alone out of loyalty to the past." "That's a mature way of looking at it," Randall said. "Some people never recover from loss, they let it define them." "What about you?" Zelda asked. "Have you ever been married?" "No," Randall said. "I was engaged once when I was 25. Pretty girl named Sarah. But she decided ranch life wasn't for her. Moved back east with a banker. Broke my heart at the time, but looking back, it was for the best. She wouldn't have been happy here, and I couldn't have been happy anywhere else." "Do you think you'll marry someday?" Randall was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "I always thought I would. But the years slip by, and out here, there aren't many opportunities to meet women. Most of the respectable ladies in Santa Rosa are already spoken for, and I'm not interested in the alternatives. I want what my parents had. A true partnership, someone who understands this life and wants to share it." "That doesn't seem like too much to ask," Zelda said gently. "Maybe not, but it's harder to find than you'd think." He turned to look at her, and the firelight painted his features in warm gold. "What kind of man would you want if you were looking?" Zelda felt her cheeks warm, but she met his gaze steadily. "Someone kind," she said. "Someone strong, not just physically but in character. Someone who sees me as an equal partner, not as property or a servant. Someone who makes me laugh, who I can talk to about anything." She paused. "Someone like you, I suppose." The words hung in the air between them, and Zelda couldn't believe she'd been so bold. But Randall's expression softened, and he reached out to gently touch her hand where it rested on the arm of her chair. "Zelda," he said, her name barely a whisper. "I know we just met today. I know this is probably too fast, too soon. But I have to tell you, from the moment I saw you at my door, something in my chest just clicked into place. Like you were supposed to be here. Like I'd been waiting for you without even knowing it." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I feel it too," she admitted. "It doesn't make any sense, we're strangers, but somehow it doesn't feel that way." Randall stood and drew her to her feet, his hands warm and steady on hers. "I'm not a man who believes in fairy tales," he said. "I'm practical, maybe too practical sometimes, but I also know that opportunities come when they come, and a smart man doesn't let them slip away." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "Stay, Zelda, not just until the storm passes. Stay here with me. Let me court you properly. Let's see if this feeling between us is real." "My brother-in-law is expecting me," Zelda said, but her protest was weak. "I'll write to him, explain what happened, send your regrets. If this doesn't work out, if you decide this isn't what you want, I'll pay for your passage to California myself. But give us a chance. Give me a chance to show you what life could be like here." Zelda knew she should be cautious, should think this through carefully. She'd known this man for less than a day. It was reckless and impulsive and completely unlike her usual careful nature. But when she looked into Randall's eyes, she saw something that called to her soul, something that felt like coming home after a long journey. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay." Randall's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, brilliant and warm. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin. "You won't regret it, I promise you that." That night, Zelda lay in Randall's bed, wrapped in quilts that smelled like him, listening to the storm rage outside and the gentle sounds of him settling in by the fire. Her mind was spinning with everything that had happened, with the enormous decision she'd just made. She should have been terrified, should have been questioning her sanity. Instead, she felt peaceful, settled, as though she'd finally found where she was meant to be. The storm continued for 3 more days, and they were the most magical 3 days of Zelda's life. Snowed in together, she and Randall fell into an easy domestic rhythm. They cooked together, played cards, read aloud from Randall's small collection of books. He taught her to play chess, and she taught him a complicated solitaire game her father had shown her as a child. They talked endlessly, sharing their histories, their hopes, their dreams. Randall told her about his plans to expand the ranch, about a prize bull he wanted to purchase, about his dream of breeding horses that would be known throughout the territory. Zelda shared her love of gardening, her secret ambition to write a book someday, her desire for a house full of children and a life filled with love and laughter. "How many children?" Randall asked one evening, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "At least 4, Zelda said decisively. "I was an only child and I always felt lonely. I want a big family, lots of noise and chaos and love." 4 children means a lot of work, Randall observed, but he was smiling. "Good thing I'm not afraid of hard work," Zelda countered. "Besides, I assume their father would help." "Oh, he absolutely would," Randall assured her. "Their father would be very involved, wouldn't want to miss a moment of watching them grow up." These conversations felt like promises, like they were planning a future together even though nothing had been officially decided. Randall was careful to maintain propriety, never pushing beyond gentle touches and the occasional kiss on her hand or cheek. But the tension between them built with each passing day, a sweet anticipation that made Zelda's pulse race whenever he was near. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Zelda woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the window and Randall already up and dressed, standing at the door looking out at the transformed landscape. "It's beautiful," Zelda breathed, coming to stand beside him. The world was blanketed in white, everything clean and pristine and glittering in the sunlight. "It is," Randall agreed. "But now comes the hard work. I need to check on the cattle, make sure they weathered the storm, and dig out the barn so I can tend the horses properly." "I'll help," Zelda said immediately. Randall looked at her, clearly about to protest, but something in her expression stopped him. "All right," he said, "but you'll need warmer clothes. I've got an extra coat and some boots that might fit well enough." Working side by side in the bright, cold morning, Zelda felt a deep contentment. Shoveling snow was hard physical labor, but there was something satisfying about it, about working toward a common goal with someone you cared about. When they finally cleared a path to the barn, Randall's face was flushed with exertion, and his eyes were bright with approval. "You're amazing," he said, pulling her close for a quick hug. "Most women would have stayed inside by the fire." "I told you, I'm not most women," Zelda replied, smiling up at him. Inside the barn, 6 horses greeted them with welcoming whinnies. Randall moved among them with practiced ease, checking each one over, distributing hay and oats. Zelda watched him work, admiring the gentle competence with which he handled the animals, the obvious affection between man and beast. "This is Rosie," Randall said, running his hand down the neck of a pretty chestnut mare. "She's the gentlest horse I've ever known. I think she'd be perfect for you to learn on if you're interested." I've never ridden before, Zelda admitted. We couldn't afford a horse on the farm. Then we'll have to fix that, Randall said. Can't live on a ranch without knowing how to ride. Once the snow melts a bit more, I'll start teaching you. Over the following weeks, Randall was true to his word. He started Zelda on Rosie, teaching her the basics of riding with infinite patience. At first, Zelda was nervous, uncertain of her ability to control such a large animal. But Randall's steady presence and gentle instruction gradually built her confidence, and soon she was riding around the ranch yard with increasing skill. "You're a natural," Randall said one afternoon, watching her canter past him with a huge grin on her face. "I love it." Zelda called back, her hair streaming behind her. "It's like flying." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Zelda fell completely in love with ranch life. She took over the cooking, started planning a garden for when the ground thawed enough to plant, and even began helping Randall with some of the lighter ranch chores. She learned to milk the cow, to collect eggs from the chickens Randall kept behind the house, to mend fences and curry horses. The physical labor was demanding but satisfying, and Zelda thrived on it. She grew stronger, her hands developing calluses, her arms and legs becoming more muscled. She felt more vital, more alive than she had in years. But it wasn't just the work that made her happy. It was Randall. Every day she fell more deeply in love with him. With his quiet strength, his gentle humor, his unwavering integrity. With the way he always asked her opinion, treated her thoughts and ideas as valuable. With the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Their courtship deepened as the weeks passed. Long rides together across the awakening landscape, where they'd stop to sit by a stream and talk for hours. Evenings by the fire where Randall would read poetry to her in his deep, rich voice. Stolen kisses that grew gradually less innocent, that spoke of desires building toward an inevitable conclusion. In late March, Randall rode into Santa Rosa and returned with a package. That evening, after dinner, he took Zelda's hand and led her outside to the porch, where the sunset was painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Zelda," he said, his voice slightly unsteady in a way she'd never heard before. "These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and laughter and love into this place, into my heart. I can't imagine going back to the way things were before, to living here alone. I don't want to." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know I'm not a rich man, and ranch life is hard. I know I'm probably older than you imagined your husband would be. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. Will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me, have those 4 children you talked about, grow old together under this big sky?" Tears were streaming down Zelda's face as she looked at the ring nestled in the box, a simple gold band with a small but perfect diamond. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, of course I'll marry you. I love you, Randall. I love you so much." He stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Randall slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "My mother gave it to me before she died, said to save it for the woman I truly loved. I hope you like it." "It's perfect," Zelda whispered, holding her hand up to catch the fading light. "Everything is perfect." They were married 6 weeks later in Santa Rosa's small church, with half the town in attendance. Word had spread about the rancher who'd found his bride in a blizzard, and the romantic story had captured everyone's imagination. Zelda wore a dress made of cream-colored silk that the local seamstress had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that she and Randall had picked together that morning. As she walked down the aisle toward Randall, who stood waiting for her with tears of joy in his eyes, Zelda thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss and grief, the fear and cold of that terrible night, the moment of desperate prayer as she'd pounded on his door. She'd been begging for mercy from the cold, but what she'd received was so much more. Randall had given her warmth, safety, love, and a future more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. "I love you," Randall mouthed as she reached him, and her heart swelled until she thought it might burst. "I love you too," she whispered back, taking his hands. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken with deep sincerity. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Randall kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. They rode back to the ranch in a wagon decorated with ribbons and bells, laughing and waving at everyone they passed. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Randall gentle with her nervousness, patient and loving as they came together for the first time as husband and wife. Afterward, lying in his arms, Zelda felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. "Happy," Randall murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Happier than I knew was possible," Zelda replied honestly. "Thank you for opening your door that night. Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," Randall corrected. "I was just existing before you came along. You taught me how to live again." Their first year of marriage was challenging but wonderful. Zelda threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, hanging curtains she'd sewn herself, adding personal touches throughout. Her garden flourished, providing vegetables throughout the summer and into the fall. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove, to manage the household accounts. She also became a true partner in the ranch work. Randall taught her everything, treating her as an equal rather than a delicate ornament to be protected. She learned to rope and brand cattle, to doctor sick animals, to drive the wagon into town for supplies. The ranch hands Randall hired for the busy seasons quickly learned to respect her knowledge and capabilities. But the true joy came one day in late autumn when Zelda realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week before saying anything to Randall, wanting to be sure. When she finally told him they were expecting their first child, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight before carefully setting her down and cupping her still flat stomach with wonder. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" Zelda asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Randall said, pulling her close. "You've made me the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Zelda continued working around the ranch, though Randall hovered anxiously and tried to get her to rest more. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she kept reminding him with exasperated affection. "I know, but I can't help worrying," he admitted. "You're the most precious thing in the world to me, both of you are." Their son was born on a warm May evening, arriving quickly and healthy, with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to the world. Randall held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the tiny, perfect human they'd created together. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "You're both so beautiful." They named him Robert Daniel, honoring both their fathers. Robert grew into a sturdy, happy baby, and Randall was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor at night without complaint, delighting in every milestone. When Robert was 18 months old, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, they were blessed with a daughter they named Ruth Marie. Where Robert was boisterous and adventurous, Ruth was calm and contemplative, but both children were deeply loved and cherished. The years flowed by in a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and they were able to expand their holdings, purchasing adjacent land and increasing their herd. Randall's dream of breeding quality horses became a reality, and the Iverson Ranch became known throughout New Mexico territory for its fine stock. Zelda found time to pursue her own interests as well. She started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods in Santa Rosa, and she began writing stories in her spare moments, tales of frontier life and adventure that she sometimes read to the children at bedtime. True to her word, Zelda wanted a large family. Over the next decade, they welcomed 2 more children, another son named Richard and a daughter named Rebecca. The ranch house, which had once seemed too large and empty for just Randall, now rang with the sounds of children laughing, arguing, playing. "Remember when you said you wanted at least 4 children?" Randall asked one evening, watching their brood play in the yard before dinner. "I remember," Zelda said, leaning against him with a contented sigh. "Well, you got your wish," he said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "And I got mine. A house full of love and laughter, a partner who amazes me every day, a life better than anything I could have imagined. Even on the hard days," Zelda teased. Just that morning, Robert and Richard had gotten into a fight that resulted in a broken window, and Rebecca had somehow managed to get honey in her hair. "Especially on the hard days," Randall said seriously. "Because even when things are difficult, we face them together. That makes all the difference." As the children grew, they each developed their own personalities and interests. Robert showed a natural talent for working with horses and declared his intention to take over that aspect of the ranch when he was old enough. Ruth had her mother's love of plants and spent hours in the garden, developing new varieties through careful crossbreeding. Richard was the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a lawyer. Rebecca was the performer, putting on elaborate shows for the family and insisting she would be an actress. "They're all so different," Zelda marveled one evening. "They are," Randall agreed, "but they're all ours, and I love every stubborn, unique one of them." Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle that died and crops that failed. There were injuries and illnesses, close calls and scary moments. When Robert was 12, he was thrown from a horse and broke his arm. When Ruth was 8, she developed a fever that had Zelda and Randall taking turns sitting by her bedside for 3 days until it finally broke. But through it all, Zelda and Randall's love remained constant, a foundation that kept them strong. They still made time for each other, still went on rides together across the ranch, still sat up late by the fire talking and dreaming. Their physical connection remained strong too, the passion between them undiminished by time and familiarity. "I fall more in love with you every day," Randall told her on their 10th anniversary. "Is that even possible?" "It must be," Zelda replied, touching his face tenderly. "Because I feel the same way. You're the best decision I ever made." "You didn't have much choice, as I recall," Randall teased. "I think I was your only option that night." "Maybe at that moment," Zelda agreed. "But I've had 10 years to change my mind to walk away, and I've never wanted to for even a second. You're stuck with me, Randall Iverson." "I can't think of any place I'd rather be stuck," he said, pulling her into a kiss. The years continued to pass. Robert grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's determination. At 20, he married a sweet girl from town named Emma, and they built a house on the far side of the ranch property. Zelda cried at the wedding, but they were tears of joy, seeing her son so happy. Ruth found love with a neighboring rancher's son, a quiet young man named Peter who shared her passion for growing things. They married and started a farm of their own, specializing in vegetables and fruits that they sold throughout the territory. Richard did indeed become a lawyer, studying in the East before returning to Santa Rosa to set up practice. He met and fell in love with a schoolteacher named Alice, and they settled in town, though they visited the ranch often. Rebecca surprised everyone by not pursuing acting, but instead falling in love with painting. She studied art in San Francisco and eventually made quite a name for herself with her dramatic paintings of Western landscapes. She married a fellow artist named Thomas, and they divided their time between California and New Mexico, always returning to the ranch for important family gatherings. As grandchildren arrived, Randall and Zelda's joy multiplied. They loved watching their children become parents, loved the chaos and energy that visiting grandchildren brought to the ranch. The house that Randall had once occupied alone now regularly hosted family dinners with 20 or more people around an expanded table, 3 generations gathering to share food and stories and love. Did you ever imagine this? Randall asked Zelda one evening after everyone had left following a particularly boisterous Sunday dinner. They sat on the porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times over the years. "Which part?" Zelda asked. "All of it. This life, this family, everything we've built together." Zelda was quiet for a moment, thinking back to that terrible night 40 years ago when she'd stumbled through the snow, certain she was going to die. "No," she said honestly. "When I knocked on your door that night, I was just begging for mercy from the cold. I had no idea I was about to find everything I'd ever wanted but didn't know to ask for." "I'm glad you knocked," Randall said softly, taking her weathered hand in his equally worn one. "I'm glad the storm brought you to me." "Me too," Zelda said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Best decision I never knew I was making." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Zelda's hair was now completely gray, and Randall's face was deeply lined from decades under the sun. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man who'd opened his door to a desperate stranger, and the young woman who'd been brave enough to walk into the storm. "I love you," Randall said, as he had said countless times over their 40 years together. "I love you too," Zelda replied, the words as true and deep as the first time she'd spoken them. As old age crept up on them, Zelda and Randall gradually stepped back from the active running of the ranch, turning over more and more responsibilities to Robert and his sons. But they remained sharp and engaged, always interested in what was happening, always ready with advice when asked. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. There was music and dancing, enormous amounts of food and speeches that made both Zelda and Randall cry. "50 years ago, my grandmother was lost in a blizzard," Robert said, raising his glass in a toast. "She found shelter here, and in doing so, she gave all of us life. She gave us this family, this legacy. To Grandma Zelda and Grandpa Randall, who showed us all what true love looks like." To Zelda and Randall. Everyone chorused, and the sound of it filled the house with warmth. Late that night, after everyone had either gone home or settled in for the night in various corners of the house, Zelda and Randall sat on their bed, exhausted but happy. "That was quite a party," Randall said. "It was perfect," Zelda agreed. "Did you see little Joseph? He looks exactly like you did at that age." "I see you in all of them," Randall said. "Your strength, your warmth, your love. You've touched so many lives, Zelda. Made them all better just by being you." "We did it together," Zelda corrected. "Everything good in my life has been because of you, because of us." Randall lay back on the bed with a contented sigh. "I'm tired," he admitted, "but it's a good tired, the tired that comes from a life well lived." Zelda lay down beside him, fitting into his side as naturally as she had for 50 years. "We've been blessed," she said softly. "So very blessed." "We have," Randall agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And I'm grateful for every moment." They drifted off to sleep together, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the love they'd built over half a century. More years passed, and both Zelda and Randall's health began to decline in the natural way of things. Randall developed arthritis that made moving difficult, and Zelda's eyesight weakened until she could barely read even with spectacles. But they adapted, supported each other, found new ways to enjoy their time together. "Remember when we used to ride out to the creek and have picnics?" Randall asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch, watching birds flit around Zelda's still thriving garden. "I remember everything," Zelda said. "Every ride, every conversation, every kiss, it's all still so vivid in my mind." "Good memories to have," Randall said. "Better than most people get." When Randall was 84, he suffered a stroke that left him bedridden. The doctor didn't expect him to last more than a few days, but Randall held on for 3 months, and Zelda never left his side. She slept in a chair next to his bed, held his hand, talked to him even when he couldn't respond, made sure he was never alone. "I'm here," she told him over and over. "I'll always be here. You saved me from the cold all those years ago, and I'll never stop being grateful. I'll never stop loving you." One evening, as the sun was setting and painting their bedroom in golden light, Randall stirred and opened his eyes. They were clear and focused in a way they hadn't been for weeks. "Zelda," he whispered, his voice rough but audible. "I'm here, my love," she said, leaning close. "Best thing that ever happened to me was that storm," he said, squeezing her hand weakly. "Best thing was you at my door. I love you. Always have, always will." "I love you too," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for everything, for our beautiful life together." "No regrets?" Randall asked. "Not a single one," Zelda assured him. "It was perfect. You were perfect." Randall smiled, that same warm smile that had captured her heart 56 years ago. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." He closed his eyes peacefully, and Zelda sat with him through the night, holding his hand, saying goodbye to the man who had been her entire world for more than half a century. The grief was crushing, but Zelda was sustained by the love of her children and grandchildren, by the memories of all those beautiful years, by the knowledge that she and Randall had built something lasting together. The ranch continued to thrive under Robert's management. The family they'd created remained close and loving. Randall's legacy lived on in every one of them. Zelda lived another 5 years after Randall passed. She spent her days surrounded by family, telling stories about the old days, teaching her great-grandchildren to garden, enjoying the warmth of the New Mexico sun. She spoke often of Randall, keeping his memory alive, making sure the younger generations understood what an extraordinary man he'd been. On a warm spring morning, almost exactly 6 decades after that fateful blizzard, Zelda passed away peacefully in her sleep. The whole family gathered for her funeral, hundreds of people whose lives she'd touched, whose existence was possible because she'd knocked on a rancher's door one frozen night. They buried her next to Randall on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a sky as big and blue as the dreams they'd shared. On her gravestone, Robert insisted on a simple inscription that told their story. She begged for mercy from the cold. He gave her warmth that lasted a lifetime. The ranch continued for generations after them. Iverson descendants working the land, raising families, living the life that Zelda and Randall had built. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold, embellished and cherished. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones. Years after both Zelda and Randall were gone, their great-great-granddaughter stood on the porch of the old ranch house during a winter storm, watching snow swirl across the landscape. She thought about that night so long ago when a desperate woman had stumbled through a blizzard and found not just shelter, but home. Found not just warmth, but love that would echo through generations. The storm that had threatened to take Zelda's life had instead given her everything she'd ever wanted. And in saving her that night, Randall had saved himself too, finding purpose and joy and partnership in the brave woman who'd refused to give up. It was a love story for the ages, spoken of throughout New Mexico territory and beyond. But more than that, it was a testament to the power of kindness, of opening your door and your heart to someone in need. It was a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them, arriving on our doorstep in the middle of a storm, changing everything forever. The warmth that Randall gave Zelda that frozen night had indeed lasted a lifetime, and then beyond, glowing through the generations like an eternal flame, proof that true love never really dies. It lives on in the children who come after, in the stories that get told, in the legacy of compassion and courage and unwavering devotion that becomes part of a family's DNA. That was the real gift Randall gave Zelda that night, and that she gave him in return. Not just warmth from the cold, but a love that would warm countless hearts long after they were both gone. A beacon of hope reminding everyone who heard their story that miracles can happen. That love can be found in the most unexpected places. And that sometimes, the worst storms lead us straight to where we're meant to be.